A few years ago, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what to call the people we listen to. Are they clients, friends, storytellers? The thing is, nothing quite fit. We wanted a name that represented the type of relationship we try to build and the way we value those we listen to. But we struggled with the right word, the single word that would accomplish exactly what we needed. And in the end, we were surprised, really surprised, to find that the answer was staring right at us. Someone with a story to share. Someone who needs a friend.
Someone who is grieving, angry, lonely, afraid, or who has questions about matters of faith. Someone who simply needs someone to listen. This is our special sauce. It's our identifying quality, because everyone is the someone and someone to tell it to. It's not just about us. We've never been about one-way relationships. We always hope to establish mutual relationships between friends who are sharing life's journey together. That means that you are someone. You have a story worth sharing. You have inherent worth. You deserve to be seen, heard, and known. It also means that we are someone. We have stories of our own. We value showing up and listening with compassion. We want everyone to know the joy of engaging in meaningful relationships. So it's so good to have you join us today for the Someone to Tell It To podcast. Today's episode is with Adam Lippin. And in our last episode for season 2, we know that you're going to enjoy this conversation. And we're going to be taking a few weeks off and then launching a whole new season this fall. And we've really enjoyed season 2 and hope you have too.
We hope that throughout this season, you have been reminded, you who've been listening, reminded that you are someone, and that everyone we've interviewed, everyone we've had a conversation with in this season is someone too. And we are proud to share that message because we believe this message needs to be heard, it needs to be known, it needs to be embraced by everyone. So thanks for being with us today and throughout this season. We're so grateful for your loyalty and for your faithfulness in joining us in these conversations.
Yeah, so just so you know a little bit more about Adam Lippin, he's the founder and CEO of HearMe app. Adam has written, "I started HearMe because there's a transcendence that comes from being truly heard, seen and validated by another human being seen for who we really are as a whole person without judgment. There aren't many opportunities for this magical connection in daily life, but it is silly because we're surrounded by people every day who also are yearning for these same things. So I helped build a platform for making these connections possible whenever we need them." And so you can already see the synergy that we had with Adam, and you'll hear more of this conversation and the connections that we have together.
Adam, those words captured our attention right away, and you are definitely speaking our language, which is why we have been looking forward to having this conversation with you today. So welcome to the Someone to Tell It To podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate being on and mutual kudos, because I'm a big fan of the work that you do. So I appreciate having this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, well, just as we've spent more time getting to know more about HearMe and getting to know more about you, we always spend an extensive period of time, preparing for our interviews, just because we want to know our guests. And we'd just love for you to talk a little bit about HearMe today, and so that our listeners can get to know you and your story, but also to learn a little bit more about this revolution, I guess you could call it, that you started.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So essentially, the concept behind HearMe is that there's an incredible loneliness crisis and there's an incredible sense of disconnection that's only getting worse in our culture. So under President Obama's Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, who literally just wrote a book recently on loneliness, he stated that loneliness is the #1 health crisis facing our country. It's worse than 15 cigarettes a day. This was way before COVID-19. My personal story as it relates to that is growing up sort of gay and closeted and never feeling like I had someone to share like my authentic self with, and feeling like I lived like within a box within a box, feeling very, very closed off. Hearing, the Surgeon General say that spoke to me because it related to my own personal life. And I spent, a good chunk of my life sort of trying to run away from people, either healthfully through meditation and yoga and unhealthily through drugs and alcohol, ultimately realizing that the only way to be human in this world is through human connection. And that's the one thing that I had a hard time with, and I recognize that I'm not alone in this. And so I really thought, how can I help address this problem? And that sort of gave birth to HearMe.
So one of the things I was curious about, just as we were learning more about your story, was there like a moment in time that's forever etched in your memory that you're like, that was the moment where I knew we were onto something?
So I think, well, just to back up a bit, because so I had a restaurant chain called Atomic Wings in New York. I ran it for 25 years and I sold it a few years ago. And I do love business. I love conceiving and starting businesses and running a business, but I wanted to do something that more aligns with my values. And for years, I was thinking, how can I do something to, make the world a better place to sort of pay for the sins of like selling chicken wings forever and giving people heart disease. So the world of yoga does not need Adam Lippin. It's sort of doing just fine, right? And so I started a company called Cuddlist, which is literally a professional cuddling company to connect people for safe platonic touch. And the reason that I did that is because I looked at people and I sort of grouped people into general categories. And at first I started looking particularly with gay men, and I saw people that sort of thrive and live happy, productive lives. I saw other people that were acting out in ways, that are not helpful to them. It doesn't serve them, but they don't know any other way to get some intimate needs met and to feel connected to people. And other people who sort of let themselves become so isolated that loneliness sort of calcified into their being. So I started a company to allow this, extract the medicine from touch, to connect people with safe boundaries and a container for safe touch to happen. In doing that, after a year or two, I started doing some really deep research in who our clients are and why are they paying $80 an hour to have a cuddle session with someone. And everyone loves touch, or a lot of people like touch, but what they really needed and what they really said made them feel human was the connection, being seen, heard, and validated. And we started to have people say, hey, I just want to talk to someone. So I really realized at that moment that people crave human connection, they need human connection. And Cuddlist is still a thriving business. It's all virtual now, obviously, but that really we have an opportunity to connect anyone all over the world instantly with someone that can hear them, see them, and validate them, and be fully present for them. And that I had the ability to do that. So that was the real genesis behind HearMe.
You also mentioned in your answer about the book by Dr. Murthy. It's called Together.
Yeah.
And what's ironic is that Tom and I are reading that book right now and absolutely love it. What did you learn from that book?
So I haven't read that book, but I will say, so I've read a lot of his writings. He's written a bunch in the Harvard Business Review, and I've watched some of his speeches. But, when you said, so I'll tell you what gave me the real genesis for this. So I literally was probably in middle school, and I read some book by Martin Buber called I and Thou. And he's just a Hasidic philosopher. He's very dense, and I don't understand 90% of it. But I understood the concept that when two people connect, right? So if you look at yourself as a little I, like your individual self, right? And you become the big I, the sort of your universal self, your spiritual self, your connected self, only in connection with another human being. So that spoke to me. And I guess my whole life was like I was trying to do that, but unable to do it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that sort of gave me a spark that I think germinated for many, many years.
Well, okay. We actually had a question because we knew that you have quoted Buber before, and we had a question about that. There was something that you had written that he wrote, that he said that a person cannot approach the divine by reaching beyond the human. To
Right.
become human is what this individual person has been created for. What does that statement mean to you?
So, there's a lot of ways to look at it. Like Swami Satchidananda said, the paths are many, but the truth is one. So you could look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and see the self-actualization as sort of the large I. But for me, in my personal experience, I can meditate. I'm really good. I can drop down and crack, and I sort of feel a little, tear, and I can sort of feel connection. But when I get out of meditation, I didn't know how to translate that into like my real life. It was almost like a little vacation. And obviously, meditation has amazing benefits. I'm not knocking it. It's been really important for my life, but it doesn't connect me to other people. The only thing that connects me with other people is being connected with other people. And when I am in a real authentic way, I feel divine. I feel spiritual. Whatever that means to you, it's like I feel connected. I'm happy. I feel elated. I feel really good. And so that's how it sort of represents for me, that statement.
One of the things I was curious about, Adam, is I remember one of our former board members who has this kind of entrepreneurial side of him. We like to surround ourselves with people who think creatively and come up with new ideas. It's just important for the future of our nonprofit, the future of our business, and the future of our mission. And he shares this story where he was in high school and he remembers back when soda machines were like a really popular thing, when they first got put into a lot of school systems. And he created this idea where he was going to start selling soda pop and candy and stuff out of his locker, because there were these soda machines that were charging astronomical amounts of money, and high school students just didn't have enough money to pay for it, so they would never make the purchase. So he decided that he was going to start buying in bulk at like a Sam's Club, and he started selling out of his locker. And he's like this type of person who, like us, is just constantly thinking of creative ways and innovative ways to carry out our mission. I'd just like to learn a little bit more about your entrepreneurial side. Obviously, it's been a big part of your story. And how did that kind of, come into play when you were creating HearMe app?
So, again, an early memory, and I've always sort of been conflicted because I love starting businesses and I like making money if I can, and I just enjoy that process. And but I had a conflict because of my sort of, whatever, just about like sort of the morality of business. And I remember hearing Ralph Nader, who, for those of you who don't know Ralph Nader, is sort of the original sort of like original gangster, like the OG of sort of consumer safety and putting people first. And he said that not everyone that works above the 17th floor necessarily has to have a moral lobotomy. And that spoke to me. And it said to me that I can be in business and I can be a good guy at the same time. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. So for me, that gave me permission to do entrepreneurial things. And so in terms of how it relates to HearMe is, there will never be I don't believe, and if I'd like to be wrong, but in general, a public sector solution to loneliness and disconnection. There's a lot of wonderful organizations working to address loneliness, disconnection. And at the same time, and there's a lot of great work happening, but all of the metadata for the past 30, 40 years suggests an increase in loneliness. Cigna did a great study in 2018 and again in 2020, which states the rate of loneliness is increasing and increasing in a very significant way among 18 to 22-year-olds. There's a lot of factors in place, social media use, et cetera. But the crisis of loneliness and disconnection, and therefore depression, anxiety, heart disease, every awful thing that you can imagine is only getting worse. So there has to be another solution. And so my mind is sort of thinks business. So I always think, how can I create a business that can help address this issue? And that's how HearMe was born. So that's sort of.
Yeah, we applaud you because we're always thinking creatively of how to carry out our mission, and one of the biggest hurdles for us, and we're pretty honest about this, if anybody have read our books, I mean, we're a nonprofit, and one of the struggles is we provide all of our listening services at a donation, on a donation based platform, and so people pay as they're able, but that's been a struggle at times because um, we still have staff that we try to care for, and especially in the midst of COVID and things like that. And so it's just been helpful to hear a little bit more of your story and how you've made
Yeah.
this work.
I wish we lived in a utopian society where money wasn't an issue. I mean, I remember actually had an interview with Ralph Nader. It was one of like the big joys of my life. He interviewed me on his radio show, and we were talking about the need, why people hire professional cuddlers. And I was like, I wish the need didn't exist, and hopefully it won't one day. But right now there's a lot of isolation and loneliness. And I was like, and I have a friend who was part of the marriage equality in New Jersey movement. And when a reporter asked him, like, what's your hope? And he said, I hope I don't need a job in 5 years. I hope I don't have a job in 5 years because it will just take care of itself. Unfortunately, right now, it's not the case. Everything's getting worse. And if there's an opportunity to do something good as a business, I think it's a good idea.
Can you talk more? Would you talk more about why you believe it is getting worse, and how is it getting worse, and why?
So the it's getting worse as stated by Cigna, as well as a lot of other really, well-researched organizations. Um, and, it is getting worse. So according to Cigna, 18 to 22-year-olds are the worst. I mean, there is a direct correlation that's been studied between social media use. People that are on social media for longer periods of time tend to have a higher level of anxiety and depression, and, therefore, comorbid sort of things relating to that. So that seems to be a pretty big factor. One could argue about, sort of how kids are raised and all of that stuff. But I think social media plays a big impact on it. I mean, I'm certainly not an expert in the actual reasons, but I think that's a big thing, and like actually going back to the Ralph Nader, we went through culturally what happened. We used to live in clans. We didn't, we grew up together as a community. We made our food together, right? And then industrialization happened and we moved out of the farms into the cities, and people started living more separate lives, disconnected from their original community in which they grew up on. And we all know the past 30, 40 years, and maybe COVID is going to help, not help, but maybe COVID is maybe a little positive side, is that we're getting back to sort of being with people in our lives in a more significant way because we sort of have to. But I think just the rapid rise of sort of we're all living alone now. And I think just culturally, especially in Western culture, this individualistic strive for success and being afraid to share who you are. I mean, I think it's not, social media is designed to put a false narrative. There's a great Buddhist expression that says we spend our first half of our life creating a personality and the second half of our life defending that personality.
Mhm.
Right? And I think social media just made it quicker and harsher. And so we are not learning as much. We don't have natural conversations. I mean, I love going to the gym. I used to go to the gym and people were like, you could say, hey, would you spot me? And you can strike up conversations. I mean, I haven't been to a gym in a while. Pre-COVID, you go to a gym, everyone has a device on, and they can't hear you. And so our ability to have this sort of natural, free, conversations that just sort of ended. And I think that that changes your relationship, and it makes it harder to connect when you have opportunities to connect.
So do you think that COVID is continuing to make it worse, or are there opportunities with COVID and the way we need to change the way we interact? Do you think that there are opportunities for greater connection to happen because of?
So I don't. So COVID is awful. People are dying. People have lost their jobs. It has destroyed lives. So I don't want to minimize, please, on any level, the horrific destruction that this disease is having on everyone, or a lot of people at least. At the So we actually, HearMe did a study, and what we found out is that the older you are, the more happy you are with the social connections that you have, and the more you're maintaining those social connections and actually improving those social connections in the age of COVID. The younger you are, and part of it's just age, you're so, is the harder COVID has made your ability to feel like a social creature and get your social needs met. So there's a really strong generational divide in terms of COVID as it creates social instability and lack of connection. So the older you are, the more you've been able to handle it and actually feel closer. Like I know my cousins and I, who we would see each other like almost never, like once in a while at a wedding or a funeral or something like that. We get together every month on Zoom now, intergenerationally, and we have this conversation. So we're getting to know each other. That probably would not have happened. So that's, a good thing. So I think it really depends on where you sit. So I think it's necessitating rethinking how we communicate with each other and have relationships.
As we were spending more time reading some of the articles and hearing some of the interviews you've had, we just love many of the statements that we've read of yours. And one that really stood out to us is you said that sharing what is on our mind and in our heart, whether it is something we've been struggling with or just some random observations, creates the space for us being authentically ourselves, letting ourselves be human beings, not just goal-oriented producers, is a radical and freeing act of self-love. We let ourselves be human. And so a couple questions just about that statement, and I think this would be helpful for all of us, especially our listeners here. What does it mean to you to be authentically human? And then how do we best help one another to feel safe being authentically human?
So, good question, loaded question. To be authentically human means to me that I'm not hiding and I can show up without I spent my life, a large chunk of my life, compartmentalizing different aspects of my life. And I don't do that anymore. So when I come to you or I meet someone, I come as my full self. That took time and energy for me to get there. So when I'm not compartmentalizing or I'm not letting fear of not feeling good enough or pick an ism, then I show up as my authentic self. And the benefit of that is I then feel connected and I'm able to show up for someone else. And I think it's fairly evident, or if it's not, the way to make yourself feel better is to make someone else feel better, right? So when I'm able to show up and be present in a conversation, my presence, my authentic presence, my active listening skills, my sort of like curiosity, my vulnerability, my ability, my desire to let someone else be vulnerable can create an authentic connection, which gets us to the the big I space. So that's how I think you're human. And I want to make sure I'm really clear that I don't want people who are not able to do that yet. You are still as human, right? We're all works in progress, and none of us ever, maybe Jesus and Muhammad reached the pinnacle of sort of that type of actualization, but all of us are on a continuum of growth. So, sometimes we inadvertently shame people by preaching how to be authentic because it's not easy. So, to give yourself permission to let time take time is something I really believe in.
We appreciate your perspective on this, and being vulnerable, being open is very important to us. And we recognize and realize too, that's why we were attracted to your writing, to your work, that you understand that as well. But we know that it is difficult and it can be very painful and hurtful to be vulnerable with people sometimes if they don't react in a way that that is positive to us. What do you say to someone who is trying to be authentic, that their authentic selves, and yet feels as if people aren't accepting of them, or they feel hurt? How can we encourage people?
Yeah. So
get beyond that to
yeah. So there are a few conversational hacks, right? So one conversational hack is you say to someone, it's really hard for me to introduce myself to you. It's really hard for me to start a conversation, but I want to practice. So, so therefore, so you practice and get up and try again. So I think if you're feeling something and, trust what your body, you feel it in your body first, like that concept of interoception. So practice, right? So just, I'm going to take a risk now and I'm going to be vulnerable. And there are also platforms like HearMe where it's easier because you're not face to face. You can do it in an anonymous fashion where you can practice. So if you can find situations where, there's the comfort, the stretch, and the no-go zone kind of a thing. So if you can find that place where you're, slightly a little bit out of your comfort zone, but you're not in your don't go there zone. I don't know if that makes any sense, but basically you have to practice a little bit and don't beat yourself up and be gentle.
Is that something that you've experienced in your own life and in your own story that you could talk about?
So in my own life, I've historically been very introverted, and I've historically not liked being around a lot of people. I have a lot of, I don't know if I don't go into a panic, but I go into a kind of a self-loathing. I'm not good enough to be in this crowd, all of that stuff. My mind tells me that I don't have enough what I have to say isn't of value, and people don't want to hear it. And so I psych myself out, I guess. And so what I had to really practice, I had to realize I can't take up space. And I think this is something that a lot of people who are more marginalized have to deal with, that they, owning their space, owning the fact that they're allowed to be there and that they have something to contribute, and pretending even if you don't feel that way. So, I felt like that forever. It's like coming in, when you're hiding a part of your identity, for me, it happens to be my sexual orientation. It's very hard to go into a conversation and to be present with someone when you're like not letting them see who you are, because then you're kind of constructing how you think you should be or how you think you should present yourself. So that had been a constant struggle for me. And even past that, even now, it's like, it's not easy for me to be naturally, I always say, like, how does everyone else know how to do this? Sometimes, and I'm learning how to do it. And it's by saying hello. It's by being kind. It's by making eye contact. These little small gestures are really meaningful. But when you feel so bad about yourself, it's really hard to do them because you just shut yourself down. So that I practice that, and then you just get better at it, and you start to become more comfortable.
I know when we wrote our first two books, and we're in the midst of a third right now, and in all of them, we express a significant amount of openness and vulnerability ourselves. And I remember after having written our second book, we had an elderly woman who had read the book, and she sent us a message, and she said, I love reading your stories because you help me feel like I'm not such an oddball after all. And to us, that statement was like gold, because essentially that's what it's all about. That's why we are authentically ourselves, because we know that there are so many others that are in similar spaces and don't feel confident or comfortable in themselves at that moment to be open and honest about it.
Yeah. So one of the value propositions, one of the main why HearMe, what I really wanted to get across with HearMe, is that they're volunteer trained listeners. And a lot of times on hotlines, on sort of like support lines, especially in therapy, it's not designed or allowed for the quote unquote listener, the expert, the person sort of doing the helping, to share anything about themselves, right? It's sort of discouraged, or it's not allowed. That does not allow for actual authentic communication. That does not allow for vulnerability, because you're vulnerable with someone who will be vulnerable back to you. That's how you forge connection. I've been in recovery for 23 years. I've been to a lot of AA meetings, right? And the NIH actually studied sort of the helper model, where one person who's helping another person who's been through something similar co-elevates both, and they both feel better. Right. But if my sponsor, if I'm saying, listen, dude, I was on Avenue C in New York for 9 hours, like smoking crack, and all this crazy, awful things happened to me, and this is how I feel about it. I feel like a worthless piece of garbage. I couldn't, all that stuff. If someone said back to me, wow, I can't believe you did that, or that's awful, it would shut me down. But if someone laughed a little bit and said, holy fucking shit, I once did this too, or my story is different, but for me, it was a bottle of champagne, or whatever, to create that human connection. That is where the magic happens, right there. And when that's not allowed to happen, and unfortunately, in most clinical settings, and sort of these services that are designed to sort of solve a problem. So and I think if you have depression, if you have, clinical issues, you need clinical help. At the same time, a lot of people just need to share what they're going through and feel connected and not be shamed by it. And it's like a lot of us spend a lot of time just not saying our truth, that we're just afraid. And then when you get it out and it's validated back to you, it's magic. It's literally God speaking to you. And so HearMe is designed, I mean, our training is all about like sharing parts of yourself to allow that other person to understand that they're not alone. You don't need to make it about yourself, but you want to, it has to be a conversation. You can't be one way, because then people feel even more frustrated, right? You're going somewhere to get support, to share what you're going through, and you're not getting anything back. So that was really important for me to make sure that that's everything to me.
That's extremely important to us too, and we completely agree with this. The importance of helping people know that they're not alone, and that we are human too. That we struggle. We have our own insecurities and our own, you know, things that we wrestle with and are uncertain about. And when people can understand that they're not alone in whatever they're struggling with, it is magic. It is sacred. It changes people's lives, and that, gosh, that's vital.
Yeah, and we're
Um,
so conditioned. I'm sorry, we're so conditioned to solve problems, right? No one can. I know what I have to do. I have to eat right. I have to exercise. It's like I know what I have to do. Does that mean I'm going to do it? How many times has someone said, "Well, just get 8 hours of sleep," or why don't you just do this? It's like I know that, right? But if you give me advice, we're just we want to rebel against that advice, or then we feel bad for not taking that advice. Why don't we just try listening, right? There's a Tracy Ruby who founded Sidewalk Talks, and she says connection is the solution, solution's not the solution, right? That for me, I spend so much time being stuck in my head. What if I could have spent that time getting it off my chest and moving on? Even if it's as simple as moving on so I can continue my work or not feel so bad. Those are powerful, and really, like, it can change your life, right? You realize you're not alone. And so many of us, we're a billion lonely people out there, and it doesn't have to be that way.
One of the videos that we love, there's a lot of like great videos that just these short commercials or clips, and one of the ones that we love to show in our training is the nail in the head video on YouTube. Have you ever seen that one?
I haven't, no.
You'll have to look it up. It's
Okay.
great for all of our listeners. You can just type in "nail in the head," and it's a husband and a wife, and a wife, the spouse literally has a nail in her head, and the husband just keeps wanting to try and fix the nail. But if you just get the nail out of your head, you'll be fine. And eventually, he comes to this revelation. Like she says to him, "I just want you to just to listen." And so he said, "Okay, just tell me about it." Yeah. And he repeats back to her. So you just have this pain in your head, this throbbing. And then they end it in a very humorous way by saying, but if you just get the nail out of your head, because they hit each other, their heads hit each other, and the man in the relationship gets hit in the head. And it's just hilarious. There's a very funny rendition though. But I think that statement that you made is so profound. I think so many of us are conditioned to try and solve solutions with another solution. And that, more times than not, that is not helpful for people. I mean, most of us simply want to be heard and to come to those solutions on our own.
and
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
what it sounded like you were saying, and I think we agree with this, that most people, they know what they need to do. They know that maybe they need to exercise more, they need to eat better, they whatever, get 8 hours of sleep. Um, that's not what they're not asking for someone to tell them that.
People want to be
It's
heard. and
exactly,
and
it's
and
exactly about being heard.
and there's that old Buddhist expression, when the student's ready, the teacher will be there. So just let someone just be there for someone. You let someone be there for you. When you're ready, if you're really looking for a particular solution, it'll sort of bubble up. It'll come, but you can't force it. It's like forcing meditation. You just can't do it. And one other thing, and again, going back to Tracy Ruby for a second, it's like, when you try to solve a problem, when you give solutions, what you're really telling that other person is you're kind of done with the conversations, right? Like you're done. Like you're not willing to listen anymore. You're not willing to sort of, as Brene Brown says, stay in the rumble, right? You're looking to end it, right? And so by you offering a solution is your way to say, I'm not going to stay with you anymore, and it's a dishonest way out, essentially, in my opinion.
I'd like to talk just a little bit more about mental illness just in our society, in our world today. And we know that HearMe app is a global initiative. And particularly in our country here, there have been a lot of famous people that have come out, even in the last week, literally, who have come out and talked about their own struggles with mental illness. I know like 2 weeks ago, Michelle Obama did in her most recent podcast. I think tomorrow night it airs on HBO. There's a huge documentary about former Olympic athletes, particularly around Michael Phelps and his struggles with suicidal thoughts. And I know in one of the articles that was written about Hear Me, and there was just this one response by a gentleman, and I don't mean to single him out, but I think it's an important comment that he made, and I'd love for us just to talk about it together. He said, "So as long as we, or all of us, keep telling ourselves there's a stigma around mental illness, we will continue to reap the expected negative consequences."
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, when do we stop calling it a stigma and just calling it something else that is just become a part of who we are?
Yeah.
I think the statistics that you had put out there, maybe in the same article, was that 1 in 8 people, I think, have some form of mental illness at one point in their lives.
Yeah, I don't remember that exact statistic. And so first of all, I live with 2 people in my life that have bipolar. So I don't want to, one thing, we damage people when we don't acknowledge, right? When we're not saying, yeah, you got something here, and there's support that you need to get, if it's medication, if it's like, so I don't want to diminish. If you have a real mental health challenge, it's really difficult, and stigma is an issue, cost, access, the correct, sort of combination of medication and treatment and therapy, and just sort of, moon cycles. So it's so there, that's hard. Talking it out. So that being said, right, on Hear Me, there are a lot of our members express having depression or anxiety or clinical this or whatever. We're not there to solve your depression. We're not Prozac, or we're not your therapist, or whatever sort of clinical thing you need. But we can help alleviate sort of some of the feelings behind it. And anyone with any issue, whatever it is, can still talk about what they're going through with another human being, and that can alleviate feelings and make them feel better, regardless of if you have mental, quote unquote, a mental illness, a diagnostic sort of, something. So I don't really know how to address that. I mean, I do know that, I was lucky enough to be at a conference with Dr. Tedros, who's head of the World Health Organization, and the conversation was about mental health care system in the world, and there's much less. Essentially, a lot of countries have a very don't even have a healthcare system, much less a mental health care system. And he said the way that he deals with it when he's feeling really bad, and it's like, what do I do? Is he finds someone and he listens to them, and he gives them their presence, and he lets them tell their story, whatever he wants to do, and he's completely available for that person, and everything else goes by the wayside, and he focuses and he puts his presence on one person, and he can do that. Right? So we can all do that regardless of if someone has a mental illness or not. We can all be available for someone and show our humanity and be there for them, and we will feel better in return.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we had talked about, I think prior to when we press record today, was just talking about the funding around mental illness, and we'd love for you to talk about your experience.
Sure. So when I first started Hear Me, I wanted to raise some money, and I have a friend of mine who I know, whose name is David Gold. I know him from AIDS activism a long time ago in New York, but anyway, he now has a company which works with foundations to help support their initiatives, whether it's infectious diseases like malaria or Ebola. Pick an infectious disease. And I met with him and I said, I told him what I was doing, that loneliness is such a horrible crisis. I want to try to find a way to be a part of the solution. And he said to me, he vibrated. He just got back from a United Nations mental health seminar or something. And that he was told that one of the things that they were talking about is that 15% of the global problems come from mental health issues. They stem from mental health issues, but only 1% of the global spend goes towards mental health issues, right? So he totally got it. He's like, yeah, let me partner with you. And so I have this amazing partner called Global Health Strategies, which is really, they do a lot of wonderful work in sort of a lot of advocacy and getting resources where they need to be globally. So when you dive a little bit deeper into that, so 15% of the world's problems come from mental health issues. So my question to David and my proposition and is like, what percentage of those problems can be, if not fixed, alleviated just by human beings listening and offering presence and being there for someone in a way that's non-judgmental, and loving and caring and all of that stuff, and empathetic, using basic active and reflective listening skills, as well as your desire to be there. So that's how that got going with him and I. So they're a fantastic partner, and they really want to help solve this problem, and it allows us to get our word out with some pretty incredible organizations.
I think just hearing some of those statistics around funding shows how far we still have to go, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the global spend hasn't really changed, and one of the things I talked about with David is that there needs to be a private sector solution, because with all of the fund, that there's never going to be enough governmental support. Even if psychiatrists and psychologists could solve loneliness, could solve that sense of disconnection that we all have. Well, Zimbabwe has 8 psychiatrists for the entire country, or at least that was 2 years ago, right? So there will never be enough psychiatrists, psychologists, or trained clinical people to deal with loneliness, and it's just not, they don't exist. Even if magically all the resources happen, they're just not enough people exist. But every single human being with the desire to want to be present for another person, even without training, right? Like there's this guy, I forget his name, but he started this thing called the Shanti Project in San Francisco, which helps people with HIV and AIDS. And all volunteers show up and they say, well, how do I do this? How do I do this? How do I do this? And he says, you know what? Your desire to be here, your desire to want to be of service and bring your full self is really all that you need. We can give you some techniques and some tricks, but basically the fact that you're here. So I think most of us want to be there for another person, but we don't know how to do it. So what HearMe does is sort of democratizes the ability to offer support for people and be there for someone. And so that's really exciting to me, because I think that all of us need to deputize ourselves to help solve, mental illness, all of these crises, and we can do it by allowing ourselves to be there for someone. And the rewards that you get from that are really great. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
yeah, absolutely.
We love the foundational principles of HearMe. Things like non-judgment, no fixing, respect for oneself, for others, presuming goodwill, things like that. Could you talk some more about those foundational principles and what they mean to you? Because we think they're vital.
Yeah. So there's a concept called unconditional positive regard that I love, and that means to me that you assume the best in people, and you assume the best intentions, and therefore you show up with that. So you don't show up with a critical eye. You're not looking. A lot of times we show up for conversations and people, and we're developing our arguments or our responses back instead of just be an open vessel, right? So I think in order to have an open vessel, in order to have like unconditional positive regard, you need to have like some boundaries around it. And you need to create a safe container for vulnerability. Without safety, without the feeling of psychological safety, nothing can happen, right? Then we're frightened animals, right? So, but if we can create a sense of, if we can provide psychological, emotional safety, then we're creating conditions for realness to happen. And so that's really how I see HearMe, and that's why these boundaries, these sort of this container, this agreement that we're agreeing to respect each other, we're agreeing to uphold certain conversational boundaries around topics perhaps. And one of the things that's most important for me is the sense of empowerment. So if you're a listener, you're empowered to make the decisions that are right for you. So if someone's talking about something that you don't feel capable or it's too far out for you, you say to that person, instead of like getting all nervous, you say, listen, what you're talking about sounds really great. I'm not equipped to handle that conversation, or it doesn't feel right for me to have that conversation. And you bring curiosity into it. So if someone asks a question, instead of like describing what you think their motivation is, why are you asking me where I live? Say, I'm curious, why does it matter where I live? Or what will that information do for you? So you respond with curiosity, so therefore you get information, and therefore, you check your assumptions, and most times we're not correct, right? So it's really important to have a strong container. So a lot of our foundational principles is to set that psychological safety, to set the parameters in which to have these conversations. And for me, the most important aspect is that everyone feel empowered to sort of allow yes, vulnerability is really important, but also psychological safety is important. So what do you feel comfortable talking about? What don't you feel comfortable talking about? And allowing that other person to know. It's not something you have to feel bad that you don't want to talk about a particular topic. You bring it in. You relate as a person. Hey, for some reason, this is like, it's bringing up, a weird feeling for me. So I want to express that. I'm not sure if I'm not comfortable with the conversation. That creates human connection. So we try to let people set the conditions for that to happen.
I'd like to talk lastly here just about HearMe app in terms of COVID and how you're seeing your work transition at all. Have you had an influx in people reaching out? I know in a recent survey that released by HearMe found that young people aged 18 to 24 feel more isolated and disconnected by COVID-19 pandemic than any other age group. And we'd just like you to talk a little bit about why you believe this age group is having the most difficult time during this unsettled period. I know right before we hit record today, we were talking about the most recent news at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where there was, these parties that broke out, and now all of a sudden they have to shut down campus again. And just I think there's probably a correlation there.
So we're social creatures, and we crave connection. We need connection, and so when that connection is taken away from us, when the way that we typically can communicate is taken away from us, especially in that, the younger you are, your goal is to form connections. That's like your mission, and that's you genetically, evolutionarily, designed to be trying to forge connections. And so when that's taken away from you, it's very difficult. Perhaps when you get older, you have some more of those connections, and so it's easier for you. And that's why you see social distancing, and that's why you see the outbreak of COVID-19, in these sort of in those kind of spaces. So, we totally coincidentally launched the app in March when COVID-19 started to really take off. It was a complete coincidence, and it really so. Loneliness has been around forever, and I think with COVID-19, the stark illustration of the need to be able to foster authentic communication and what happens when we don't have it became really apparent, along with some, I lost my job, I can't leave my house, a lot of fear. And so when you have that, the ability, we can't change COVID-19, or we can take personal responsibility, but we can't necessarily personally change the meta sort of what's going on. But what we can do is we can figure out ways we can share about what we're going through. It sucks. I'm locked in this house. I have no money. I can't go to school. I couldn't go to my graduation. I mean, we have so many conversations on the app about from people who are graduating college, or they're in their whatever year and they had to leave early, and sort of how to deal with that. Or I'm with my family and they're a pain in the asses, and I don't know how to get along with my brother, and I haven't slept in my bedroom in 4 years, and I'm back. So there's just sharing what you're going through, these universal experiences. And one of the things that's so interesting is, like, no matter where you are in the world, especially as lockdown, people, I mean, I've talked to people, a mother of 8 in the Philippines and someone from a very, conservative religious family in Oman. And the feelings behind all of it are very similar, yet the external situations look very different. So we just share our stories. We share what we're going through. And someone says, it really sucks. I hear you. I'm locked down too. I hate it. I haven't been able to see my boyfriend, my girlfriend in a year. Or I'm locked with my mother too, and I can't believe how much it sucks. Just allowing these conversations to happen helps to sort of like dissipate it and just be real. And it's something we can do. I can't solve COVID-19. I'm not a scientist, but I can be there for someone to listen to the story and share mine back.
You can help blunt the edges a little bit, kind of help to make it just maybe a little bit easier to live with and endure. That's what we try to do. And again, it gets back to reminding people that they're not alone. They're not alone. And it's something we all need to know, that we're not alone.
We're not. And it's like like I said, I've been in recovery, and there's a woman, Cookie, who used to say, Park Avenue or Park Bench. She goes, the situations are different, but the feelings are the same, right? So, and I've had enough conversations, and I really do believe this is true. We all have the same, generally fears, anxieties, hopes, and desires as anyone else. So when I put my head to the pillow at night, I'm thinking about, money. I'm thinking about my family. I'm thinking about health. I'm thinking about those, fucked up, whatever at work. And I want things. I just want to. We all of us have very similar feelings. We all go to bed. We all wake up. Our external circumstances are different. We're certainly aware of, like, a lot of institutionalized issues which create a lot of really awful conditions. But in general, we all have the same feelings, and we can all relate to each other. We just have the desire to do it. We just have to have the desire to be present for someone, and then the avenue to do it. So what I hope with HearMe is that for people who have that desire, they have the avenue to be of service, and they can also, people toggle back between being a listener and a member. So you can be a listener, really, wanting to be available for someone and share part of yourself, or you can be a member at another time, anonymously, just sort of sharing what you're going through and have someone else sort of help prop you up and be there for you.
Well, I think, Adam, your work, like our work, is more needed now than maybe ever before. And so we just applaud the work that you're doing. We applaud the fact that you have this kind of entrepreneurial mind and spirit, but yet you also have this very strong mission-oriented part of you too, and how you're trying to intersect the two and really make the world a better place, a more holistic place. And we appreciate that so much. So thanks for taking some time to be with us today. If people want to learn more about HearMe app, how can they do so?
So you can download the app at Android or iOS, HearMe.app, or our website, HearMe.app. And my email is adam@hearme.app if anybody wants to email me. I'm sure I'm on Twitter. But essentially, you can download the app on either app store or just go to our website.
Adam, we resonated with your philosophy, with your words, your writing, your speaking, with what you're thinking right away. And so it's been great to connect with you, and to collaborate with another person who sees these things the way we are, the way we do. And we appreciate your time. We appreciate your efforts and everything that you're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm feeling very validated, just so you know. And this is sort of like when we see someone, you're seeing me, I'm reflecting back, you're reflecting back. we just want to make that available for as many people as possible. I'm a big fan of both of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again for tuning in to today's episode. Again, this is the last episode in season 2, and we're just really proud of some of the topics that we've discussed. Topics like empathy, loneliness, racial divides, activism, being in the arena, COVID-19, obviously, grief, overcoming life circumstances, and others who are in this arena with us. September marks National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and we thought it was especially important to highlight it here at the end of this episode, because suicidal thoughts, much like mental health conditions, can affect anyone, regardless of age, gender, or background. Every year, thousands of individuals die by suicide, leaving behind their friends and family members to navigate the tragedy of loss. And in many cases, friends and families affected by a suicide loss are left in the dark. Too often, the feelings of shame and stigma prevent them from talking openly.
National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month is a time to share resources and stories in an effort to shed light on this highly taboo and stigmatized topic. We use this month to reach out to those affected by suicide, to raise awareness, and to connect individuals with suicidal ideation to treatment services. It is also important to ensure that individuals, friends, and families have access to the resources they need to discuss suicide prevention. Someone to tell it to, and HearMe app is here to help. So we thank you again for being with us, not just today, but throughout this season. This is our way, someone to tell it to's way of being in the arena. One of the ways that we can very publicly help people, we hope, to remember that they're not alone, and help people to know that they are truly someone.
We just wanted to take another minute to thank all of our podcast sponsors and to especially highlight the individuals who have supported us week in and week out, bi-monthly. Also, 2 organizations in particular. We wanted to thank Wonders Found Thrift Store, located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. You probably heard their commercial several times throughout season 2, and now most recently, the Jessica Drew Sunshine Memorial Fund that was highlighted in this episode a few times, and especially as we link it with one of our previous episodes with Lindsay Drew, who's one of the founding members of the organization. So thank you.
And as we take this break now at the end of the summer, we look forward to you joining us again this fall as we begin season 3 of the Someone to Tell It To podcast. So we say goodbye until we listen again.